All right, we are back with our section on control theories. And in this subsection, we're going to talk about the two more modern, more famous, more researched control theories, both of which involve this guy Hershey. Okay? So, Hershey, back in 1969, he comes up with what he calls social bonding theory, right? And this, again, sounds relatively simple when you say it fast. His idea here is the more bonds a person has, the less likely they are to commit crime. Okay? Now, the important thing here is that Hershey identified 4 different kinds of bonds that people can have and said that, people who have a lot of all 4 are going to commit basically 0 crime. But if you're lacking any one, or God forbid, all 4, you are much more likely to become a criminal, right? So in other words, if we want to control people and prevent them from committing crime, we need to increase these 4 types of bonds. Okay. First kind was attachment, right? And this is affectionate bonds. This is bonds to family, of course, but then also things like peers, co-workers, fellow people at your church or whatever, right? The people around you, the more attachment you have to those people, the better. The second one is commitment. And commitment bonds are essentially the same as Toby's stakes in conformity, right? Things you have to lose. A good job, a dog, a nice house, or really cool apartment that you rent or whatever, right? Things that are going to be taken away from you if you commit a crime, get sent to prison, whatever. Those are commitment bonds, right? Involvement bonds are about the time you spend doing conventional activities. For adolescents, it might be studying and extracurricular activities and sports and going to church and going to the Boy Scout events and things like that. The more of those involvement bonds you have, the less you're going to commit crime. And then finally, there's beliefs. And these belief bonds are all about morality. How much do you buy into that whole crime is wrong thing? I would never punch somebody in the face. I would never steal something. I would never, this belief in morality and kind of conventional values and all those things. So those are the 4 kinds of bonds that are theoretically at least measurable indirectly, if not directly. And according to Hershey, the more of those 4 bonds you have, the less likely you are to commit crime, right? So this has been done. There's been lots of research about these social bonds, and it's pretty consistently shows that the more of those bonds people have, the less likely they are to be criminal, right? So there's one piece of research that looked just at attachment, right? How much, how can those attachment bonds prevent people from committing crime? And what it says is that, bonds with family and other people, absolutely, the more you have of those, the less likely you are to commit crime. And it works with peers. The more attachment bonds you have to peers, the less likely you are to commit crime. But only if those peers are also kind of law-abiding, conforming, conventional values kind of peers. Attachment bonds to delinquent peers doesn't reduce criminality. Okay? Measuring variables specifically related to family and your attachment to family and the kind of controls that they're able to do, child raising practices, attention from parents, time spent with parents, all those things. That kind of subset of attachment bonds is very good predictor of whether someone would become deviant in adolescence. Religious belief has been shown to reduce crime, right? So the more you express belief in positive religious values, the more time you spend with religious organizations, the lower criminality. And then there was another piece of research, looking at all of the different types of bonds and all of the different measures for the attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief. And basically it says, look, all four of those are indeed linked to crime, but they're much more linked to minor crimes, the small little deviant things like, smoking marijuana and parking tickets and, little minor things like that. They're links to major crime, robbing banks and sexual assaults and murders and robberies and things like that is there, but much, 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 much weaker, right? And when you look at all of the different research about this social bonding theory and Hershey and these four different kinds of bonds and all that stuff, you get consistently linked, statistically significant relationships, but really small effects. It doesn't explain statistically much of the variation we see in people committing crime. So it's good that it's consistent, but it's bad that it doesn't seem to explain much of that variation that we see, right? So, fast forward a few years, Hershey partners with this guy Gottfredson, right? And they come up with what they call the general theory of crime, right? And it's billed not necessarily by them, but by others as like the theory of crime. And it's, of all the theories we're going to talk about in this course, it's probably the most recent in time to really kind of have its beginnings and be introduced into the major criminal justice criminology literature, right? Because it's only 1990. It's within my lifetime. Most of you watching this were probably born after 1990, but it is definitely within my lifetime. So these two researchers, again, Hershey, this is the same Hershey from the social bonding theory that we just talked about. They come up with what seemingly an incredibly simple explanation for crime. Crime is committed by those who lack self-control. If we have developed our sense of self-control, we're not going to commit crime. But other people, if they don't have that same sense of self-control and that ability to kind of restrain themselves from doing whatever it is they want, they're the ones that are going to go out and commit crime, right? So where do we develop our self-control? How does that come about? Why do some of us have it and some of us don't? Well, according to Gottfredson and Hershey, it's all about our socialization process when we're very young, okay? How our parents and teachers and all those things, how they interact with us, how we're socialized, how we kind of learn to behave as people when we're children determines whether we are going to have a good sense of self-control or not, right? And according to these two, this development of self-control has to take place when you're a child, because by the time you're roughly 8 years old, that's set. And you can't then learn self-control later on in adolescence or adulthood. We have to focus on children and increasing their ability to control themselves and not just act on any whim they want through this whole process of socialization and teaching and values and all those things, right? So, according to Gottfredson and Hershey, this is not just a theory of crime. It is a theory of crime, but it's not just a theory of crime, right? This not only explains crime, it explains what they call all manifestations of low self-control, which can be everything from crime to, other kinds of deviance, like drinking alcohol, having illicit sexual encounters, and even things like accidents, right? All of these, according to them, is explained by this lack of self-control. And again, it seems really simple when you say it fast, right? Now, one of the problems here is, how do we measure self-control? If we want to test this theory, if we want to go out and say, measure the self-control of a big group of people, have some number put on that, and then see if they commit crime or not, how do we do that? Right? And one of the things that this original theory lacked was any kind of description of how we're supposed to measure somebody's self-control. So if we measure self-control by, do you do these bad things like shoplift and smoke marijuana and all these other deviant acts, then we're back to one of those tautologies where our independent variable and our dependent variable are essentially measuring the same thing. So of course we're going to find a relationship there, right? So if we want to measure self-control, we have to figure out ways to measure self-control that aren't just measures of deviant behavior. And that is a little bit of a challenge, right? I mean, think about how you might have some kind of measurable, objective way to gauge somebody's self-control, and then think about, well, is that just a measure of how much deviance they're committing? How many rules they're violating, right? Now, people have done it. People have attempted to do it. How well they've succeeded, we don't know. How well their measures are actually measuring somebody's self-control, I don't know, right? That's up for debate. But they've done things, they've found ways to try to get at that concept of self-control without just measuring deviant action. And using those measures, using those definitions, they found that, yeah, there is a decent link to crime, but like social bonding theory, it's a relatively minor effect, right? So there seems to be something there because it's pretty consistent. People who commit crimes do seem to have lower self-control than people who don't commit crimes. But the effect there is really small, right? There was one estimate that said it's like single digits % of crime can be explained by the amount of self-control somebody has or not. So this idea that this general theory of crime is the one great theory of crime, pretty much out the window. But there does seem to be a link between the amount of self-control a person has and whether they become a criminal or not, right? But the other big finding of the research that's been done on the general theory of crime, and one that might be incredibly important, is that whereas Gottfredson and Hershey said that self-control was fixed by the time somebody hit adolescence, research has shown that's not true. We can change self-control. Might be more difficult after adolescence or after somebody has entered adolescence, but it's not impossible. We can change self-control. People can learn to control themselves later on in life, even if they never did as a child. So if we want to reduce crime, and we believe the general theory of crime is a good explanation for why people commit crime, we can go out and teach people self-control and have both, everybody from teenagers to full-on adults. There are processes we can use to increase the amount of self-control that they are able to have and exhibit. Okay? All right, that is the end of our section on control theories. And remember, this was all about not why do people commit crime, but why do most of us not commit crime, right? So, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one.